Hey, everybody. All right, day three of Do You Know Your Rights? So I want to thank all of those who have been at day one, day two, and now you are back for the return to hear what's up with New York. My name is Chazeen. I am the Chaz and Chaz Chats. I am the creator of Chaz Chats. For those of you who aren't familiar, the past events have usually been focused on anything from um, professional development to fitness to whatever happens to pique my interest at the moment. All right. So, right now, one thing that's really, really important to me is what's going on within our community. I know that a lot of us are going through the motions, ever since the craziness that occurred over the spring. And so it's leaving a lot of people wondering, okay, what are my rights? Seriously, when it comes to these cops and police accountability, what are my rights? If my rights are violated, what are my options? And so it was really important to me, just as it is for every Chaz Chats, to get folks who I trust to offer some really valuable information to leave you or to have you leave here feeling empowered. And so, if you are on, in addition to speaking about our rights, I want you to stay tuned towards the end because we will be chatting with Kat Calvin, the founder and executive director of spreadthevote.org. She's going to give you a crash course on voting, which local offices to look out for, on top of, what to look out for when it comes to mail-in ballots, because we need to make sure ours get counted. All right, because apparently within our community, a lot get thrown out. So stay tuned. So right now, just an announcement for you guys. Unfortunately, our host, Jamila Mustafa, had a bit of emergency and was unable to make it. And so I will be taking over for her. So I'm going to kick it off by introducing, actually first, let me throw it to our promotional sponsors. I definitely want to thank them for being a part of this event. All of these influencers, whoever you might have gotten the information from, you guys should definitely absolutely head to, oh, can we get it on screen? There we go. Make sure you head to the RSVP page and check them out. I'm so grateful for you guys. Thank you for spreading the word. Thank you for caring enough to make sure your community is educated and once again feels empowered when it comes to this topic. So I just want to take a quick second to just run through everybody. I'm showing you guys, they're all on the screen. Great, amazing, awesome people. And thank you. Thank you once again. All right. So I'm going to introduce our first guest. All right, so Charles Coleman is a seasoned civil rights attorney and legal analyst. He's quickly emerged as one of the strongest thought leaders and modern voices in today's conversation on race, law, culture, politics, social justice, and civil rights. Charles began his legal career as a prosecutor. That part's interesting, right? In Kings County, in Brooklyn. Um, in the district attorney's office. So while there, he excelled, of course, that's why he's here, in the special gangs unit, where he processed several of the city's most dangerous high-profile criminals. But now he's switching over to this side, helping us get justice. He's been seen on everything from CNN to MSNBC, Arise News. He's a commentator and analyst for Fox 5 News. He's been on Huffington Post Live, even Hot 97. So we are so happy to have you here, Charles. I'm going to bring you on screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chazeen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Such a pleasure to be a part of this conversation, and thank you for putting together this 3-day, series on what it is that we need to be talking about in various aspects of community. I really appreciate the fact that in a time like this, you're using your platform in such a responsible way to really support community and support others. So thank you for having me.
Thank
It's
you.
really a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to get into this because, New York, we got a lot going on here oftentimes. So
Yes.
I'm happy here. So, I mean, let's start with the basics. It's funny because recently in the news I saw, I don't know if you heard about Salehi Bembury, the VP of Versace uh, footwear, men's footwear, how he was stopped. Yeah, so I just know that within that video, he had a lot. And just for background, for those of you who are unfamiliar, he was stopped by the police for jaywalking, quote unquote. According to them, that was the story. According to him, he was racially profiled, which has been confirmed, and I believe so as well. So I know there were a lot of questions about what you could do. First thing I'll ask you is like, if you're walking down the street and a cop just stops you, do you have to stop? And what do you have to do?
So the law in New York is that the police can ask you for identification, and you are supposed to have identification on you, and you are supposed to provide it to police if they ask for identification. That does not mean that they have the right to go into a longer, in-depth conversation, i.e., where you're going, where you're coming from,
Mm,
who are you with, and do that whole bit. But the police do have a right to ask for identification, and in those instances, you are supposed to comply. I think the challenge is the very broad notion of probable cause, because
mm,
probable cause can mean a number of different things. An officer can have probable cause for a stop if you fit the description of a crime that they're currently involved in an investigation of, for example, right? And so we've all heard that, oh, well, you fit the description, right? And so that's where
yeah.
probable cause becomes a little bit problematic, because it ends up allowing these officers to sort of backdoor their way into some additional questions and some additional liberties around frisking you and stopping you and searching you against your will. And so that's where it becomes really, really important for you to understand your rights and understand the law around search and seizure, particularly in your own state, but even your own constitutional rights, because probable cause will be the thing that they use to get beyond what they have initially, which is basically just the ability to ask you to stop and provide your identification.
Okay. So his probable cause for Salehi was jaywalking, because he
Correct.
was it the fact that he admitted to it?
I mean, I don't know the specifics of how they became informed of the jaywalking. I don't know whether they observed it with with their own eyes. I
They
suspect
did.
that they would
They
have
did,
had
and
to
they
do that.
asked him, and yeah,
So
they asked
yeah,
him, and he said, "Yeah, I was jaywalking."
yeah.
And
So in that instance, not only do they have probable cause of something that they actually observed firsthand, but then he arguably, admitted to it. At least, he admitted to it in a way that would sort of shore up any issues of probable cause around an additional stop and potential search of his person, even if it's just a safety pat down.
mm. So, is it an option to not admit to it in that moment?
Absolutely. You
Okay.
absolutely. You don't there are two questions that you are responsible for answering in New York City if a law enforcement officer stops you. Your name,
Mhm.
and well, it's not even a question, providing your identification. So basically your name and where you live. Your identification and your name. That's it. That's it. And I tell people all the time, unless you just are a friendly person, there's no other reason that you should be talking to police unless you're in custody.
Okay.
Because I tell them they're entitled to ask your name, they're entitled to ask for your identification. Other than that, it's very simple. Officer, am I in custody? And if I am in custody, I want a lawyer. And if I'm not in custody, I gotta go. And there's no in between, because sometimes officers will try to say things like, yeah, yeah, you can go, just answer my questions first. And your
Okay.
response, again, is, officer, am I in custody? Because if I'm in custody, I want a lawyer. And
Okay.
if I'm not in custody, I'm free to go. And it's very important that people stick to that, because if you're not in custody, they don't owe you the constitutional protection of you being read your Miranda rights. And anything you say at that point as a statement isn't covered by Miranda. So you are not in a position, if you are not in custody and you decide to just start answering questions and having conversations with police on the streets in the midst of a stop, you are not in a position to later on claim that those statements should be inadmissible,
Mm,
because you made them at a point where Miranda didn't apply. Miranda only applies when the police take you in custody, i.e., you are not free to go. And there's no in between about that. It's so important that people actually ask the question, officer, am I free to leave? And there's no in between. It's either yes, you are, or no, you're in custody. And if the answer is no, you're in custody, then your response is, before I answer any questions, I need a lawyer. That's it. That is it. we sometimes allow the way officers are trained to try to get us to talk more than
Yeah.
we actually should during these encounters. And we sometimes allow that to be the thing that, from our perspective, we don't see it as a big deal if telling an officer where we were coming from is the thing that is going to make the officer leave us alone. So we don't see that as a big deal. But you have no idea how that might play into a larger conversation or an investigation of a crime
That's what I
that
was
you
gonna
had nothing
ask.
to do with, right? But now that you've given him or her some additional information, that may be, in their eyes, enough probable cause to detain you. Whereas if you just were quiet and you sort of force them to make the decision, am I going to try to detain this individual without probable cause and without a statement? Clearly, they know their rights. Am I going to put myself in that position, or am I going to move on? And that's why I say to people, two questions, officer: am I in custody? And if it's the yes, I need a lawyer. And if it's no, it's bye bye. That's it.
I love that you stress that part to ask that question. Because, like, we see people ask that question sometimes, but I don't know if it's really resonated with a lot of people that, like, oh, you need to ask that question, and that the conversation can end right there. It also, is it safe to say that that also could potentially lead to, um, giving them the opportunity to plant things on you? I know this is not going to always be the case, but like for example,
So
I think in that video he and I mentioned it because it was is the most recent case that I saw, but I think they asked to like search him, and he was like, you can do whatever you want, and I think he did that out of fear, right?
mm, well, I think yeah, I think that sometimes people who are not criminals feel like I don't have anything to hide. I haven't
Mm,
done anything. You can do whatever you want. So I think a lot of times that sort of attitude comes from a place of sort of outrage and indifference to the extent that you're being stopped and harassed, if you will, over a situation that you haven't done anything wrong. You don't have anything to hide, and so I can understand that. However, I would caution people against it. If an officer stops you and asks you to do a search of your bag or of your person, you can entitle them to a safety pat down. You can let them know, I'm not carrying any weapons, but you are free to do a safety pat down. The safety pat down is one that is external in nature. It doesn't involve them going inside your pockets. It doesn't involve them going inside your bags. It is simply
okay.
a pat down of your outer person to make sure that you don't have anything sharp or dangerous or something that might be uh, uh, going in my. No, we're not doing that. Answer is no.
Okay. I think we had like some glitches. I want to remind you guys, definitely feel free to send in your questions as you have them, because I'll be taking the questions, a Q&A at the end. So send in the questions as you have them, and I'll see them and loop them into the conversation. But yeah, that's important. I'm glad that you mentioned that. And so it kind of brings me to the next question. What if, what if you're detained now? What should we be doing? What should you not do? What are the big no's and must do's?
The age old adage still remains true. Always ask for a lawyer. This is it. Always ask for a lawyer. You should never assume, no matter how simple a situation may seem, you should never assume that it's something that you can handle on your own. These people are trained to interrogate. They are trained to get information out of you. They are trained to put you in uncomfortable situations in a way that will make you feel like it'll just be over if I talk.
Yeah.
They will do a number of things, including and it's sad to say, but it's really true. Like people will watch Law and Order and ask me questions about interrogation techniques. Like, does that really happen? And I'm like, yes. They will give you 8, 10, 12 cups of water and leave you in a room and wait for you sort of have to use the bathroom and not give you a bathroom and then try to pressure you to talk. You need to just ask for your lawyer. That is the way that you deal with that. You ask for your lawyer, and that's the best way and the easiest way to sort of get around that. When you are detained, that's the only thing on your mind. I need to get to my lawyer. When you
Yeah.
are initially detained, that's it. Because I think a lot of us assume that we are more equipped to handle these situations on our own than we actually are. But that's just not, you're stepping into an arena against trained killers. You know what I mean? In terms of, I don't mean that in a literal sense, even though they are. I mean it in the sense of this is what they do. They are trained professionals in order to get information out of you. You don't play that game. So you shouldn't play that game as an amateur. You should be very clear about calling your attorney and letting them do what you hired them to do.
I love that you mentioned the fact that they're trained. And this is another reason why it's so important for us to know our rights. Not only know them, but I'd say study them.
Right.
Like, take notes here and memorize it because when you're caught up in the moment, you'll forget, right?
Word. Word. It's
Yeah.
very easy. I mean, it's very easy. And I think it's also easy, Chazeen, because people oftentimes, if you're not a criminal, you don't think like a criminal. Like, you don't think that you have anything to hide.
Yeah.
And so I think that many of us, particularly folks who have not had a ton of encounters with the justice system, we don't always appreciate the fact that like it could happen to us, meaning that you could be the racially profiled one. You could be the one that, has drugs planted on them, or you could be the one that the cops are sort of not being dishonest about, or
That's
not
right.
being honest about. You don't always consider that. Especially if you're not a person who regularly deals with the criminal justice system. You sort of expect, oh, well, I know it happens, but not to me. And so you're never on guard in the way that you should be around how quickly these things can get out of control if you're not sort of vigilant about maintaining and protecting your own individual rights and civil liberties.
Man, you are preaching because I guess you've heard this all before. Or people are like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
gonna happen to me. I'm not worried. And look at Jay
And then
Farrow,
when,
the whole thing that happened with him. He said that was the first time he experienced racism. And background for the people with Jay Farrow, he was out jogging. He's from SNL. He was out jogging, and then all of a sudden, the police, the cops just drew their guns on him, forced him to get on the ground. At one point, and this had happened before George Floyd, a, a cop had his knee on his neck. Just imagine six cops with their guns drawn at you, and you're like, "What the heck is going on?" And it was because they said they thought he was somebody else or whatever, but he told them to Google
yeah.
him, and that's how they knew.
And you don't, and again, you don't process it that way. And in some ways, that is a function of our own privilege, right?
Mm.
And in another way, what it should tell you is, there are myths about black people in America that are like inherently anti-black and speak to some propensity around criminality. And the reality is that like that's not the reality for most of us. And you can see it by the shock and surprise that we exhibit in these situations because it's like, wait,
Yeah.
I'm not a criminal. I
Not
didn't do
me.
anything. Right. Like, wait, me? How could this
Not
happen to
I.
me? Not I, right? So like there's that privilege there, but there's also, I think that also, like I said, says a lot about on a larger scale who we are as a people. And it's important to remember that as we engage different systems, particularly in this conversation, the criminal justice system.
Okay, so someone asked, and this is a good question. They said if you don't have your ID on you when they ask, can you be detained? Because for Jay Farrow, he was able to say, Google me. He didn't have his ID on him.
Right. Technically, it is a detainable offense for you to be out in New York City without an ID. So if you are going for a jog or you're doing whatever, I encourage people put it in the sole of your sneaker. Or just have it on you. Like you should have it. And the reason for that is sometimes people have warrants. Sometimes people, have an iCard that's out that is they may be a wanted person, and it may not even be you. but you may fit a description. And in
Mm.
order to avoid the confusion of being, mistaken for someone who you are not, and combined with the fact that this is also something that is required of you by law in New York State, just keep your ID on you. You'll save yourself a lot of trouble.
Let's keep it on you. Okay, let's get to traffic stops or being stopped in your car. So someone wanted to know in a traffic stop, if you are asked to exit your vehicle, do you have the right to refuse? And I know it's a little different with cars, right? Like
So
needing a warrant to
again,
search you and all that stuff.
yeah, so this goes back out. This goes to training, right? And what I was talking about training. If you've ever watched or if you've ever been pulled over, and I've been pulled over plenty of times, cops are trained around these stops, okay? There's two officers. They don't approach from the same side. One approaches from one side, usually the passenger side. The other approaches from the driver's side. The driver's side's job is to distract you, while
Is this
the
a
other
strategy?
person,
Oh my
oh yeah,
gosh.
absolutely. The
Okay.
driver's side officer's job is to interrogate you and distract you, while the passenger person's side, their job is to scan the perimeter for anything that could be amiss, problematic, dangerous, or what have you, right? But they're doing that while you're not looking, while you're
Mm,
looking at the officer who's at the driver's side, right? The other thing that they'll do when they ask you to get out the car, they will stand in the way of your door being closed so that you cannot close your car door behind you and force you to walk between them and your car door as you get out. There's a reason they do that. The reason is, regardless of whether you consent to them searching your trunk, your glove compartment, your center console, or any of those other sort of closed items, they can perform what is called a plain view search of your vehicle by putting their flashlight in your vehicle and sticking their head inside the door or the open window of your car. It's a lot easier to do if your car door is open, which is why they position
mm,
themselves that way so that they can look and see if there's the presence of any contraband, weapons, drugs, or other stuff that shouldn't be there. So you do have to get out, but just again, I give that example because people need to understand these folks are trained to do what they need to do. And because of that, you shouldn't engage these systems without the benefit of a lawyer or thinking that you can outsmart them. They do it for a living, and that's what they're paid to do. So you shouldn't be allowing them to go in your trunk. You should not be opening your trunk for them. You should not be opening your glove compartment for them. They are not allowed to do that without your permission. They can look with the flashlight under the seat. They can look around the vehicle. They can do all of those things because that's considered to be in plain view. But in terms of
mm.
opening things up, like the glove compartment, the center console, you can't do that.
All right. So let's say they're asking me to do something that they're not. You just mentioned they're not allowed to do, and I say I have my response, and the officer gets upset. How do I combat that? Because now we're dealing with the unfairness.
So I think you have to, unfortunately for us as Black people in America, I always have this conversation from a principle and from a practical standpoint. Everything I just talked about was principle. It is what your laws are, what your rights are, what the Constitution says you
Mm,
are able to do. But all of us, because of the countless examples of injustice that we've seen, have to understand that there's also a practical approach to these situations that we have to be mindful of that just requires us to use our emotional intelligence in order to survive. If there's any tip that I would give to someone who stopped in a motor vehicle, um, and worried about escalation or whatever, as soon as you are stopped, if you cannot turn your camera on, even just to record audio, even if it's just to record audio, as soon as you are stopped, take a quick look at your watch and take a quick look at the closest cross section or closest streets or the closest exit on the highway. Why do you
Okay.
do that? You do that because, bar none, in today's age of technology, if you don't remember a badge number or a name, guaranteed that if you know approximately what time you were stopped and approximately where you were stopped, you can find out who the officers were who made the stop because that stuff is all tracked. So if you don't know the name or the badge number of the officer, that's fine. Don't even worry about that. You don't even need to ask. You can simply make a note of where you were and when you were there, when that stop took place, and when you file your complaint, they will be able to determine who made that stop.
Oh, that's a gem. Okay.
I'm out
Okay.
here. I'm out here, Chazeen. I'm out here.
Look, you might be saving a life potentially. That's why we're here, is like sharing this information. So
Word.
you mentioning audio. I don't know why I didn't think about that because someone's question was if you can record or what are the rules? What are the rules on recording police encounters? But I didn't even think about audio. Because when we think about the phone, we think about holding up our phone, like,
Sure,
and that could
sure.
potentially upset someone.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you have a right to record police in their activity so long as
Yeah.
you are not interfering with their execution of an investigation or
Okay.
affecting an arrest. So if they tell you stand back, you got to get out of their way, stand back, right? If they tell you cut it off, you do not have to cut it off. You do have a right to record them, but you do not have the right to sort of stand in their face as they're making an arrest and ask them, "What are you doing? Why are you arresting him? Why are you arresting him? Why are you arresting?" They don't have to respond to you in that instance. You can record them, but again, you can't get in the way of the execution of their duties. So you have to allow them that space. But again, in the event that you don't even have the ability to do videotape, sometimes audio can be priceless in terms of establishing certain facts, being able to refute a story. In the example that you just gave me, you gave me an example of an officer who wanted to search your vehicle, right? And you said no, and then they ended up searching. Imagine if that was on audio, and then they tried to say, "Oh, she gave us permission to search her vehicle," and you had audio from that evening that said, "Can we search your vehicle?" And you said, "No, I'm not giving you the right to
Which you
search my
hear
vehicle."
of
Like
oftentimes.
you don't even need video for that, right? Like that's something you won't even need video for. So you never know how advantageous having audio can be, even if it's just audio. I mean, sure, it's nice to have video if an encounter escalates and it's like physical or something like that. But you never know how these things are going to shape out. So if all you have is audio, sometimes that may be the difference. That may be the difference maker and the thing that you need.
Yeah. Okay. So let me look at some of the questions here. So, wait, but what if the cops tell you to turn off your camera, your phone?
Um,
They did that with the Tanaya Pilgrim and Messiah Young case.
correct. Correct. They will do that. That again, that is one of those things where uh, you have to make an emotionally intelligent judgment call. If you are the subject of an arrest and a cop is attempting to apprehend you and you are under arrest, they're going to do whatever they got to do to get you in handcuffs. And so if you're standing there trying to record yourself while being arrested, you're probably not going to be very successful. You can keep the phone recording and lose the video and put it in your pocket and maybe get some audio out of it. Maybe you could do that, right? But if you're the one who's being arrested, I'm not saying you have to turn it off. I'm saying that the police are going to put you under arrest regardless of what they have to do to have
Yeah.
that done. Now, if you're an observer, like a witness, and they tell
Yeah.
you to cut it off, you don't have to cut that off. You can back up. You can back up. You can move out of their way, but you don't have to cut it off.
Okay. Can they take your phone if you're being arrested?
Absolutely. If you're being arrested, they will take your phone. If you're being arrested, if you are the person who's being arrested, your phone is going to get taken the same way your wallet would, the same way your purse would, your keys, everything else, and it's going to be vouchered with any and everything else. So they're
Okay.
absolutely taking your phone.
Okay. So just a reminder to everybody, yo, thank you for sending your questions in. They've been great. Continue to send them in as they come. I'll pick and pull the questions and get those answered for you guys. Let's jump into some state-specific stuff. New York. I know we were talking about chokehold, and you had, some stuff to share about that. Please enlighten us.
So yeah, so it is illegal in New York State for officers to use a chokehold. That has been a conversation that actually preceded Eric Garner, and then was brought up again after Eric Garner, and then was brought up again subsequently. And there are like very specific legal definitions as to what a chokehold is, but I think the larger question that we should be having as a community, not just in New York, but throughout the entire nation, is this conversation about qualified immunity. Because you can have all of the procedures and policies in place that you want, but if there are no actual penalties when they are violated and no other means of holding officers individually accountable for what it is that they do, then a lot of what you have done in terms of the work to get certain policies established is for naught, because folks will be able to sort of escape personal liability and civil liability for their wrongdoings. And so that's why, my position is, for our community, qualified immunity and ending the doctrine of qualified immunity is like a non-negotiable. It's a non-negotiable for anybody who wants our support, whether that's politically or privately. Like, that's something
I'm
that
glad you're
we need to
mentioning that.
put. Yeah, it needs to exist literally at the top of our list of demands as we have conversations about police misconduct and civil unrest and social justice and criminal justice reform. The abolishment of qualified immunity absolutely needs to be something that is like number one on our demand list.
What else are you looking for in candidates when you're voting?
Me individually,
I mean,
reparations.
without covering Cat's part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, reparations is a big deal for me on multitude of levels. Like, so I guess my question is, I'm a black person in America. I am an American descendant of slavery. I want to know what plans any candidate has to use their platform or their position to dismantle systemic inequity in all forms. That's pretty much it, right? So, like, everyone exists in a different silo. You might be running for school board. All right. So in the school board, there is in education, for example, there are achievement gaps between black boys and their white male counterparts. There are different or disparate levels of out of school discipline as it relates to black and Latino girls and boys as compared to their white counterparts. All of these things are systems or symptoms, rather, that speak to systemic inequity in education. So you're running for school board. What do you plan to do about that? Right? Like all of those things are my thing. In whatever capacity, whatever office, whatever vein, whatever level you are seeking election, I want to know, how do you intend to use your platform to dismantle systemic inequity wherever you are, whether
More
that's
details,
economics,
yeah.
healthcare, education, criminal justice, social justice. How are you engaging that conversation? That's what I'm looking for in my candidates.
And be thorough about it, not just like graze over it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. What's your plan? Like, have a real plan about it.
yeah, yeah. Is there anything anything else New York wise that we should be aware of? Has anything changed since George Floyd?
Um, that's such an interesting question, and I think one of the things that makes it interesting is it's unusual because we've been in the house for the most part, right? Like, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, so we didn't have the same degree of activity during the summer as we normally would in terms of people being outside. I think that there was, of course, there were rumors around the NYPD slowdown after the summertime produced a pretty anti-police sentiment throughout the country. and after conversations around defunding the police took place, you saw um, allegedly you saw numbers in terms of violent crime in New York peak, and people had different theories as to why that might be. I don't necessarily know that that is something that is we can tackle on a legislative place. I think that that is a conversation that we have to be engaged in around understanding the strength of police unions in New York City. People don't really talk about the strength of unions or of the law enforcement unions in New York City, but that's a huge factor. You know, if they're not, those unions are not as strong in other places, but in New York, they're incredibly strong and incredibly influential politically. And so when we saw the anti-police sentiment throughout the country, it wasn't a surprise to me that in New York, officers sort of were, for lack of better terms, very butthurt about it and took, you know, a variety of different approaches in terms of how they express that. Many of them passive aggressive in nature, and at the end of the day, that doesn't help the city. That doesn't help the citizens. Everybody loses in that example. But here we are.
Mm. Um, Extra Special TV wanted to know if is getting into a verbal altercation with an officer an arrestable, yeah, offense. I wanted to know also, in addition to that, what are the common claims that they'll make, like the little loopholes in system? Because I know resisting arrest is another one where you can get, if you just run us through those.
Yeah, I mean, resisting arrest is really like a tough one, right? Because it's a natural instinct if someone is uncomfortably putting your arms behind your back and then putting them in handcuffs, like you might flail a little bit, right? So it is a natural instinct on some level that you might resist. I think the question in that instance comes from a place of how sensitive the officer is or how much of a jerk the officer wants to be about having processed your arrest. That's one. Um, I've seen things as crazy as like a person who's being arrested speaking up to an officer loudly, and because they are speaking, in the midst of a crowd to an officer, they are,
Uh,
just inadvertently, some spit may get on them, and the officer says, "Oh, you assaulted me." It's just like, are you kidding me? Like, you assaulted me because you spit on me. I've seen that. But I think the most common one, you're right, is the resisting. The resisting arrest is the most common one for absolutely nothing in a lot of instances.
okay. And then also like verbal altercation, can you be arrested for that? Like if you're yelling
Um,
at them, can they arrest you?
so the charge for that normally would be, if I'm not mistaken, that would be menacing or attempted menacing. Like if you're attempting to menace an officer, the challenge with menacing is that uh, one of the elements of the crime is that it causes the person who is being menaced to feel afraid, to feel attacked or afraid, and so absent that person like waving a gun or something like that, it's going to be very difficult to prove or to establish that this person yelling at you while you're armed with a baton, mace, a gun, and a badge, that you're the person who felt scared. That usually doesn't happen. But getting into a verbal altercation with police is not necessarily illegal, but it is a quick way for police to scrutinize you and look for probable cause. That is very likely to happen, where, the police may then sort of start paying closer attention to what you're doing. And if you decide at that point to jaywalk, well, now they can make your life a little bit more difficult
Mm.
because you've, sort of put yourself on their radar.
I guess it's thinking about human nature. While it's still not okay or fair, like, you take it up a notch, the person wants to take it up another notch, that's just the way it's going to
You're
be.
gonna lose. Yeah, you're gonna lose that when
Mm,
you're dealing with law enforcement. You're gonna lose that. That's not smart engagement for us
mm,
as people, right? Like that's trying to get your rocks off there. I realize it's frustrating. I
mm.
get it, but it's just not smart for us as a people to put ourselves in situations where that's how we would engage law enforcement. I don't agree with it, and I don't think anything good will come of it.
Okay. I know that we have 1 minute left. My last question for you is if I've been, if I'm seeking accountability, my rights have been violated, what are my options?
Well, in New York, you should be looking to engage the CCRB, which is the Citizen Complaint Review Board. Most most cities and municipalities have some sort of oversight board or for citizen complaints around law enforcement encounters. But I think the most effective and direct means in New York City is the CCRB. You should be looking to engage the CCRB, which is the Citizens Civilians Complaint Review Board around police misconduct. And every place, every city has some sort of oversight board, and you should make it a point to know what that is, so that you are able to file complaints if you need to around what law enforcement did to you. And then, of course, people like me have jobs because you can also hire a lawyer. You can hire an attorney who, if you feel like your rights have been violated, to engage law enforcement on your behalf in ways that are responsive and informed, so that you don't have to have that burden on yourself.
And there's two different lawyers for, say, if you would hire a criminal lawyer, like in the case of, say, Breonna Taylor, and then there's a civil rights lawyers helping you with the monetary aspect of it, financial aspect of it, right? Or
Well,
am I wrong?
I mean, they can be the same thing, right? So, for
Okay.
example, with me, with me, if you get arrested and you did not do the crime, or you feel like, you didn't do the crime and you want to get off, you still have to deal with the DA's office, right? So you would hire me to help you navigate that situation from a criminal side. But if you feel like your rights were violated in this process, i.e., it was a bad stop that was based on racism and you were unfairly brutalized during that stop, or
Hmm.
there's some other additional racial animus that would suggest your civil rights were violated. Those are things that you would use a civil rights attorney like me to engage on the civil end. But it can be the same person. It absolutely can be the same person.
Oh, look at that. Learn something new.
Here you go.
Well, thank you, Charles. I really appreciate it. This conversation, the comments are saying that you are providing some great information, great information, great information. Interesting. Wow, I had no idea about that. That's wild. So thank you.
Well, thank you
uh,
very much for having me. I appreciate it. And, and,
so
and
I
let
want you
folks
to.
know they can let folks know they
Oh
can
yeah.
find me at, yeah, CFC40_official on Instagram. You can visit my website, www.cfcolemanjr.com, and follow me in either of those avenues. I'm very, very active on Facebook, Charles F. Coleman Jr. I'm verified, so
Yes.
you can
You
follow
got
me
you got a
there.
lot of IG lives going there too, right? If you guys want more
Yeah, yeah,
information.
yeah.
Hmm.
I host an IG live every Friday at 7 p.m. Called The Binder and the Rapper, which is a fun, more relaxed show about news, issues, politics, conversation, from the perspective of two black guys. So you would enjoy it.
Yes. It's super relaxed. Charles be on there with his hat. He got the cigar. He's like,
Yeah,
yo.
yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely. I do. Right, right,
I love
right.
watching
Absolutely.
CNN Charles and then IG Live Charles. Y'all gotta log in and check that out.
No
I'll send it
doubt.
in the email after this event to you guys. But yes, thank you so much, Charles. We definitely, absolutely appreciate you, and you guys should definitely check him out and follow him. So I'm going to go over to hang tight. We still want to bring you back on. I'm gonna head over to Kat now because we are going to talk about voting. Yeah, she's going to give us a crash course. So once again, Kat is the founder and executive director of spreadthevote.org. She does this, y'all. She does like 5 panels a day. She just told me. All right, I'm exaggerating. She does like 2 to 4, but still, this girl is a superhero. So, Kat, thank you for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
I am grand. I am grand. So, of course, we definitely got to start with the offices, the local offices that people should be paying attention to if their interest is police reform.
Yeah, so I'm you've all been watching and have a little bit of a crash course in law school. That was way more interesting than when I was in law school. But you know, we're all thinking right now, hopefully you voted. If you haven't, please vote immediately.
Yeah.
But we're all thinking about criminal justice reform and how we can fix it. And I think it's really important to understand that voting is not the whole movement, but it is a part of the movement. It is a very critical part. We live in a representative democracy. If you don't like that, start a revolution. But until then, that is where we are. And the people who represent us, we have the power to vote in, to vote out, to choose and find new people to put on the ballot we like, et cetera. But it's a critical piece of the pie. So I'll walk through a couple of offices that are really for different stages or steps in the criminal justice process and what to look out for on the ballot. So starting super local, your police chief. You may or may not like your police chief. In almost every city in the country, your police chief is appointed by the mayor, which means that you have to pay attention to what your mayor is saying about how they feel about criminal justice, defunding the police, et cetera, because that is going to inform who they choose, not only to be the police chief, but when the local police or the chief do something wrong, whether or not the mayor chooses to discipline them, dismiss them, etc. The mayor also, usually together with the city council, determines what the city's budget will be. So they're the ones who determine, are we going to give the police more money or less? Are we going to put more money towards mental health services, etc.? So pay attention to what your mayor has to say on that point, and also what your city council representatives have to say. Most areas have a sheriff. Sheriffs are generally elected directly, which means that you can just pay attention to what those candidates say themselves, to what their history is, their backgrounds, and then make a decision about who you want to vote for there. You also locally have a district attorney. The district attorney is really important. They're the ones who decide who's even going to get charged for a crime in the first place. So they determine, are we going to charge someone black for having, 4 grams of an illegal drug, but not someone white? They're the ones who determine if 2 white men shoot a black man in the back while he's running, are we going to charge them with a crime or not, right? Like, that's district attorney. District attorneys are directly elected. So you have the power to decide who is going to be the person in your district who decides who they're even going to put in front of the courts in the first place. When you go a little wider and look statewide, the attorney general is basically the lawyer for your state. They're elected mostly. In some states, they're appointed by the governor, so then you have to pay attention to what the governor is saying. And the AG is the person who not only decides to prosecute, for instance, very corrupt politicians in your state, but we saw in Minnesota when the police who murdered George Floyd were not being charged by their local district attorney. The police weren't doing anything. And Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, was a gubernatorial candidate who his big thing is he wants to build more prisons. Maybe not a person you want to vote for. Or maybe you do, depending on where you stand. So the other 2 things that I'll talk about, judges. Judges are really important. Depending on your state and the level of judge depends on how they get their jobs. They are frequently elected. And then also there are a lot of judges who are depending on your state. There are some states where you even get to elect the judges in your state Supreme Court, and others where they're appointed. Judges are on the ballot and really difficult to research. I'll walk through in a minute some ways to find out how you have to do some research to find out who to vote for, but they're really important. I mean, they're judges. We all know how important they are. We've all watched some law show on TV, and they're really critical to making sure that people get a fair trial. In fact, I really recommend, if you want to see the world's worst judge, watch the new Netflix movie, The Trial of the Chicago 7. That is a great, the worst judge. And then lastly, so a lot of your states will have something called ballot measures. A ballot measure how they get on the ballot depends on what your state is, but we have heard about some really big ones in the past couple of years. If anyone has paid attention to the state of Florida, there was an amendment, a constitutional amendment on the ballot, right, a measure that people could vote for to try to re-enfranchise returning citizens who had lost their right to vote after being convicted of felonies. Now, there are a lot of challenges because the state of Florida, of course, overwhelmingly approved that amendment. And then the state legislature has now taken away a lot of those rights, which is why it's important for us to pay attention not only to the measures on the ballot, but also who's in the state legislature and who's the governor, because they all work together. But there are a lot of really important things. I live in Los Angeles. We just voted on a ballot measure to end cash bail, which is really exciting. We voted on another ballot measure to allow returning citizens with felony convictions to vote while they're still on probation. Super exciting. A lot of people skip those ballot measures because the wording is really confusing, but they are really, really important. So those are the things on your ballot that are important. Now, how do you figure out what they mean or who they are? There are a few different ways. So all kinds of organizations and community groups will put together ballot guides. And a ballot guide is just what it says. It's a guide for what's on your ballot. Spread the Vote makes them for the 12 states that we're in. You can go to spreadthevote.org/2020 guides. And basically what they do is that they will, lay out, first of all, some of them like ours, answer questions about how to vote and when your polling place is open and describe different terms and things like that, which are important. But they'll also say, here are the candidates for these offices, and this is what their platform is. And a platform is just what they stand for, how they feel about education or healthcare, et cetera. And so they will tell you everything about that candidate. You can find ballot guides from your favorite organizations. So if you are a fan, a lot of local Black Lives Matter chapters are putting out ballot guides, or, the Sierra Club, if you really care about the environment, or Moms Demand, or the NRA, depending on which side of that argument you're on. And so you can see, and they will endorse or approve of candidates or ballot measures based on what their values are. So the Sierra Club will say, we support this candidate because they're really strong on the environment, right? You can also go, so I love a tool called ballotready.org, which you can type in your address. It'll pop up everything on your ballot, and it gives you objective, nonpartisan information. Just this is what, these candidates stand for. This is what these ballot measures stand for. It links to where the sources are for where they're getting information. Your local paper also will endorse candidates. And here's the thing, whether you agree with their endorsement or not, you can read in the endorsement why they endorse this candidate. So if they say, we endorse this judge because they always convict people with the harshest sentencing, right? Well, you can say, oh, I don't like that, so I'm going to vote the opposite way of this endorsement. But it's a really good way to find out what your paper thinks. And then lastly, one thing that I always do is I look up candidates on social media because they will be very honest. I mean, I think we've all seen in the last several years that politicians don't have the filter they're supposed to have on social media. And so even for small offices, a lot of local candidates may not have websites, or they may have terrible websites, and it may be hard to figure out what they stand for. But, I just voted, we had a water reclamation board, which I will admit, didn't know we had one. And there's an election, and it was really difficult to find any information on these folks. And then I looked them up on Twitter, and one of the dudes running, extremely racist on Twitter. I was like, well then, not voting for you. And he didn't have a website or anything else, and no one was endorsing for the Water Reclamation Board, but Twitter told me everything I needed to know. So there are a lot of really good ways to find this information. And then the very last thing I'll say before, I don't know, Chaz, if you have any more questions, I'm rushing through all of this. It's really important for you to know and follow the rules for voting. They're different in every state, and they can be complicated depending on the state. For instance, everyone realized a few weeks ago that to mail in your ballot in New York, depending on where you are in the city, you may need 2 stamps in order for your ballot to actually arrive, right? There are states where You need, well, in 36 states, you need an ID to vote. And it's also important to know if you don't, because we had a problem in the primaries where polling places all over New York were asking people for ID when they didn't have to have one. And so it's important to know what your rights are either way. We also have a huge problem with people not filling out their mail-in ballots correctly, and then they get discarded. So Black and brown people are 2 times more likely to have their ballots thrown out, and young people are 5 times more likely to have their ballots thrown out. Spread the Vote has put together a website, readtheeffingdirections.com, where we have the directions for how to vote in all 50 states laid out really simply, with everything you need to know, like you need a stamp, this is when you need to get it in, etc. But it's really important to know the rules and to follow them, because you want to be sure that your ballot is counted. And if you're voting in person, early voting starts soon in New York. In most states, they're already voting. Go as early as possible. Take a snack. You may be in a long line. It's worth it. And make sure that you've prepared.
Wow, you covered everything. I'm like looking through my questions to see. Oh, you want to tell the folks about these fake ballot boxes?
Okay. This is an important election, which means that there are a lot of shenanigans. We're having a lot of shenanigans here in LA. Somebody recently set fire to a ballot box drop-off point in a Black neighborhood in Los Angeles. We've also got the California Republican Party, and they've taken credit for this, so we know that it was them who did it. They put fake ballot drop boxes around Los Angeles County and Orange County. So this is where critical thinking and doing a little research is going to be really important. There are ballot drop-off boxes around New York, around Ohio, and one in each county in Texas. Thank you, Governor Abbott. All over LA County, etc. They are usually really easy to figure out. In LA, we have really colorful, beautiful ballot boxes that have official ballot box painted on them, and they're really cute and Instagrammable. And then you have these metal boxes that look like trash cans that were picked up at Home Depot, and a printed sign that says GOP ballot box drop off, right? Like, it's very obvious what the fake one is. This is the same thing though. There's a lot of targeted disinformation. People will put out Facebook ads specifically usually targeted at communities of color, where they will say, hey, did you know you can text to vote? Or, hey, election year this year isn't on Tuesday, November 3rd. It's on Wednesday, November 4th, right? Like, they will try to do disinformation. And so it's really important. Use your common sense and critical thinking. Google it, look up information on more than one site to make sure that it's true, because there are a lot of people trying to pull a lot because it's an important election and people think it's worth cheating. The last thing I'll say on that too is we've got a little under 2 weeks left until this election. If you are voting by mail, either mail it in today or find a drop box, or you can, in most states, drop off your ballot at the county clerk, or in many states, you can drop it off at your local polling place. If you go to readtheeffingdirections.com, we can tell you which one, but you don't want to mail your ballot less than a week until the election, because you want to be sure that it arrives on time. And we've got more people voting by mail than ever before. So if you're waiting until the last minute, you can still vote by mail, but turn it in one of the other ways.
Someone said, I love that she knows all this information like the back of her hand. And then there's a bunch of wows and good to know and stuff like that. Yeah, so thank you so much, Kat. That's really good information. And you mentioned the readtheeffingdirections.com.
Yes, readtheeffingdirections.com. Yeah, and we also have, if you go to votewithed.org, we've got some videos on different types of voter education, like how to vote as a returning citizen, etc. There's a lot of good information out there. And you can always DM at Spread the Vote US on all the socials if you have a question. And we're happy to answer it and help you out. Voting is more confusing this year than ever before, so please ask questions.
Yes, I dropped all the links in there. I also dropped in the comments, guys, so you can find them. I also dropped, I'm going to bring Charles back on the screen. I also dropped in Charles' Instagram handle, so you guys can check him out there. It's all in the comments. So thank you once again, guys, for joining us, Kat and Charles. The information was so good. The thing I love the most is seeing the comments where people are like, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, wow, thank you for letting me know that. And I know all that leads to, at the end of the day, them feeling empowered. One thing I want to say is I know that in the midst of, hearing some of this information and about the imbalance of power, it could be a little discouraging. Like, okay, is there a point? But remember, there is a point for everything we mentioned. And then also going back to what Kat mentioned and Charles mentioned, voting the right people in office is a part of your power to combat this. And perfect example, I know I brought up Tanaya Pilgrim and Messiah Young, the students from Spelman and Morehouse. Their mayor is big on police accountability. Less than 24 hours later, after they were tased and pulled out of their vehicle, she fired the cops that tased them. That's what you want. And because she hires the chief of police, as Kat mentioned, she was on board. That's what you want. On the other hand, you have the horrible examples of Ahmaud Arbery. So just keep that in mind. It's possible, you have power. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you once again, Charles. Thank you once again, Kat, for helping us wrap this up. Oh, and you guys, catch the debates. They're on tonight.
Right.
Almost forgot to plug that. Catch the debates. Catch up. All right. All right.
Thank
Thank
Yes.
you.
So we're signing out now, guys. Until next time.